Look, with these gals that want to buy it, most of them are old and dignified. Social register types, you know what I mean? They can't be trotting down to Times Square to pick out the merchandise. They gotta have some kind of middleman. And that's where old Daniel comes in, you know what I mean?
Hey! I'm walking here! I'm walking here! Up yours, you son of a bitch! You don't talk to me that way! Get out of here! Don't worry about that. Actually, that ain't a bad way to pick up insurance, you know.
It's crazy, a stud like you paying that dame that you told me about double sawbucks. You know, with proper management, you could be taking home $50, maybe $100 a day, easy. Hey, Brucey, hang in there, baby.
What's that?
In my place with O'Daniel about 2 weeks ago. He ain't much of a stud either, from what I hear.
Hello there, and welcome to Cinema Eclectica, part of the Geek Show podcast network. We are the Geek Show's dedicated movie podcast. I am Aidan, and today I am joined by...
Mick! Back from the wilderness.
Yes, we haven't had Mick on in a long time. I can't remember what the last episode you were on, Mick. Was it Dark Phoenix?
I think it was Dark Phoenix.
That might have explained a little bit why you haven't been on in a while.
Or as I like to call it, really, really, really dull Phoenix.
Yeah.
Yes, I should point out that is not why I've not been on the show. It's not that Dark Phoenix put me off. I mean, it kind of did, but not off being on Eclectica.
And I'm pushing it as that. But later on in the show, we have reviews of We the Animals, Dogs of War, and It Was a Faint Dream. But in the meantime, our film of the week is a reissue, and it is Midnight Cowboy, the classic 70s film starring Jon Voight and Dustin Hoffman. Is this your first time seeing Midnight Cowboy?
It is, and it's one of those films that falls into an increasingly growing suite of films where they're celebrating their half century, and it means they're younger than I am.
Yeah. But to set this up, Jon Voight plays a character called Joe Buck, who leaves his hometown of Texas to head to the Big Apple in search for, night work, really. He works as a gigolo, and he basically comes across a lot of, trying to get his hands on a lot of midwives around the Big Apple, and eventually he comes across Dustin Hoffman's character, Ratto Rizzo, who is a veteran of the streets. He's a cripple, firstly. He walks around the streets, and a friendship starts to enrapture the both of them and intertwine, and they begin to start thinking of heading to Florida in the meantime.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, it's the only buddy movie I've ever seen where the two buddies need to seek relationship counselling.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very dark film.
I mean, it's not Bob Hope and Bing Crosby, is it?
No, it's certainly not a light-hearted buddy romp. But yeah, should we head straight into this? Because I had seen Midnight Cowboy before when Criterion put out, I think it was one of their releases last year, where they put out a Blu-ray commemorating, I think, the 50th anniversary or something, or the 40th, I can't remember. But it certainly did strike me the first time I watched it, because it was one of these classic films that I've meant to see, but I didn't get round to it. And that's partly due to, you don't have all the time in the world to see all these classic movies. But what did you make of it, Mick?
Well, it's one of those it's one of those classic movies that falls into that category of, it's a really well-made movie, but I don't really think I'll watch it again.
Yeah. Ever.
Unfortunately,
I had to rewatch this again because it had been a year. So yeah,
I mean, it's not one of those. It's like you think of sort of things like Casablanca or Godfather or something like that. You sat there. It's Saturday night. ITV have cancelled some sporting event because of bad weather, and they go, and now another chance to see the timeless classic Casablanca. You're less likely to switch it over than if they say, and now Jon Voight and Dustin Hoffman in Midnight Cowboy. At that point, you are going to go off and find something less onerous to watch.
Yeah, because needless to say, it is a very, very, very dark film. But I think what helped me get through this is the relationship between Voight and Hoffman in this when I first saw it, and that was particularly the thing that was the most striking to me, because I guess it's just that dynamic between the two that really did work for me.
I think the beauty about it is that they're two so distinctly opposite characters. I mean, I think it's not going too far to say that Ratso's had the life beaten out of him by life.
Yeah.
He's the poster boy for cynicism and reality checks. Whereas John Voight is almost like George out of Mice and Men. Lenny out of Mice and Men.
Yeah.
He's got a childlike naivety, although his aim for his career in New York is obviously of a more salacious and adult kind. His optimism for his chances of success are childlike. I'm going to be a gigolo, he says with the same zeal that my grandson says, I'm going to be an astronaut,
Yeah.
and heads off with the same level of planning, to be fair.
And there's also the hidden darkness within his character as well, because repeatedly through the film, there are flashback sequences to when he was like a child, with his relationship with his grandmother. There's stuff like that, and it's, incredibly twisted and grueling stuff. And I guess that's, one of the many reasons why Midnight Cowboy gets its edge, because those flashback sequences are just so abrasive and really do, it shocked me the first time I saw it, because it really did, put it on.
And the first couple, particularly the flashbacks with Grandma, I thought, am I watching that? Is that what they're saying to me here?
Yeah.
And certainly those flashbacks are a mixed message. I do like the flashbacks to his relationship with Crazy Annie, the way that they build those up, and also the way that it kind of messes with the timeline as well.
Yeah. Because it works on that level, I think, personally speaking. I mean, it's also, home to, because this was directed by John Schlesinger, who we've had on the show before. I think I remember doing Yanks at some point, but...
I think I was on that show.
I think you were, actually. Yeah, I remember. But yeah, he got his name, he cut his teeth basically working in Britain, so Billy Lye, I think he did Black Sunday, or some did Bloody Sunday, or Black Sunday, I can't remember which film. But he was known for the kitchen sink realist dramas of that time, really, before you head over to America and went over for great success here. And you could certainly see that influence on this film as well.
The cinematography is very much that internal two-shot that's going on throughout the film, rather than big, expansive, establishing shots. You get one or two of those as he's journeying from Texas to New York, and latterly when they're heading from New York to Florida. But the majority of it is tight-up shots on one of the two characters that are in conversation. It very rarely goes beyond that.
Yeah, it's very... I don't want to say minimalist. I think it's got a meaty relationship at the heart of the film, but then there's this, outer, I want to say griminess to it that makes it, the realism pack a punch and makes, the character dynamics, quite fruitful.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is the ending is, I mean, without going into spoilers, of course, is, goddamn so sad.
Well, this is it. I mean, it goes against that whole grain of Hollywood movies, doesn't it? In that there are no winners here. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
I think the other thing it manages to achieve is it manages to illustrate the seedy underside of New York, and particularly that sort of nighttime culture of prostitution and drug parties and things like that. But it doesn't do it in a salacious sort of What the Butler Saw type way. It's not like a lot of films of that kind of era, when they're trying to portray that, do lengthy, extensive, almost softcore porn sequences. It manages to avoid doing that, but still get across that seedy underside, the underbelly of New York nightlife.
Yeah, it's definitely got that element to it too, because I remember, of course, that's a way to help contextualise, obviously, the character's own feelings as well. I mean, when Ratso falls down the stairs, towards the end of that nightclub sequence, it's not really portrayed in a light that's ultimately, here's, the grand tragedy, or the build-up to the grand tragedy that it'll inevitably be. he just like falls down the stairs, without warning, really. And I think that's part of the reason why it helps, depict it as real life or close to real life as it can.
I think the other thing that's handled quite well, considering it's what earned its X certificate at the time, is the exploration of Joe Buck's sexuality, because there is this hint that there is a repressed gay tendency with it, whether he's bisexual or gay. There's the definite sense that maybe he's just pushing it back because that's not what Texas cowboys are like. And that's explored in a very sensitive's the wrong word. It's an understated way. Again, it's not done in a salacious fana, a nudge nudge wink wink sort of way. It's done in a very sort of, well, he's not outright not enjoying this,
Yeah, I mean, that sequence in the cinema, I think it definitely cemented that idea you've just explained, Mick, I think very, very well, because it's, you get the sense that is repressed sexuality, is it, as you were saying before, and I think there's a lot of meaning to that, that, many other viewers would get, different interpretations of.
And I think there's a strong undercurrent of Midnight Cowboy that, given the climate we live in today, you won't get away with it in terms of portraying certain characters that way. There is an element of stereotypicality to some of the bored housewives and some of the male partners that Joe Buck encounters. And some of the language as well is a bit uncomfortable in the modern age. You kind of have to keep reminding yourself that what you're watching is a film from the late 60s. It's
definitely got that too. Yeah, with the benefit of hindsight.
Yeah. So.
Cheerful, I know.
Yeah. It's not a film that takes you to your happy place, is it?
No, it's certainly not. I mean, I certainly commend it, because I think I remember correctly, this won Best Picture at the Oscars at 1970. I can't remember, it was either 1970 or 1971. I think it was one of the two. But it was wedged in between, Patton and... I remember seeing this. It was wedged in between, out of the Best Picture winners, Patton and I think Oliver at some point. which comes to show how it stands out.
It does a little bit, yeah. So what it actually won was Best Picture, Best Director, nominated for Best Actor for both the leads. Best Supporting Actress for Sylvia Miles was nominated. Best Adapted Screenplay, it won that for Waldo Salt. And was also nominated for Best Editing. And there is some, particularly in the flashback sequences, there is some stupendous editing.
Yeah, I agree on that.
And it clearly, I think, possibly from that sensitivity that came from being involved in those kitchen sink dramas, it scored a lot better at the British Academy than it did at the American Academy, in that it won all the categories that it was nominated in.
Wow. Yeah. So. But no, the first time I saw this, I was very impressed with it. Certainly because, I'm not a big follower of the Oscars anyway, but I was certainly very impressed with Midnight Cowboy the first time I saw it. And this rewatch has pretty much cemented that opinion twofold. I still think it is a very commendable film, quite compelling. Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, like I said at the top of the show, it's one of those films that you can admire. You can enjoy watching it, but not in the way that you enjoy watching, a big summer blockbuster superhero movie or something. It's not good fun. But you can appreciate the skill and the craft that's gone into it. There's also, I've also come up with a Midnight Cowboy drinking game.
Oh, no. What is that?
See which tools from the actor's toolbox Dustin Hoffman employs to create the character of Ratso. Because he pulls the lot out. There's the raspy voice, there's the limp, there's the seemingly impromptu coughs.
There's the improvised segment where he almost gets run over by a taxi.
Yeah.
There's that. I mean, it's definitely got all those elements to it, yeah. But no, I completely agree. I think it's one of these films that, I admire a lot. I think it's very well made. Definitely not one of my favourite films ever made, but you can certainly respect it. I was just going to say, do we have any recommendations? That's all.
Well, I do. I think, especially with the flashbacks to the sequences with Crazy Annie, and also the kind of almost flash forward that it does as well, and mixing up what's past, present, and future, and what's real and not real. American Psycho and Fight Club.
Okay, yeah, okay. For me, I would have to say, I mean, if you want a more lighter, I guess, buddy movie, I would have to say The Last Detail, simply for, like, you know, the differences between the two. The Last Detail is also what happens to be one of my favourite films of all time, and I think it just works as a nice balancing point to Midnight Cowboy's bleakness for me. And I can't think of another, I'll be honest. I think I did have another.
No. One thing I am going to have to do, though, to the powers that be at Cinema Eclectica Towers is I'm going to have to put in a request to have a few less of the films that appear on lists of films to watch before you die, because I'm running out and I want to live quite a long time. So.
Yeah.
The Geek Show is the largest independent podcast network out there. And to be independent, we need a little bit of help every now and again. So if you want something to show your love of The Geek Show, head over to thegeekshow.co.uk, click on the shop and buy some of our lovely wares. Buy them all.
So if you're enjoying what you're hearing, you can head on over to our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Geek Show. Additionally, you can head over to our shop where we have a lot of merchandise up for sale, including t-shirts and mugs. You can find You can find The Geek Show on Facebook, and you can find us on Twitter at TGS_The Geek Show. I've been reading the notes and it says, find Cinema Eclectica on Facebook, and then I've realised, oh no wait, we no longer have a Facebook account, do we? The notes.
I blame the showrunner. Damn you, Williamson!
You've tuned in, now you're going to get turned on to The Geek Show. I'm Quentin Flynn. People know me as Axel, who says, got it memorized? You should. The Geek Show. It rocks.
You went so far. Is that scary? I'll never let anything happen to you. You grew up with all these lakes and rivers. You got two brothers that swim like a couple of goldfish. How come you don't swim?
You don't know how to swim either.
Yeah, well, no one ever swam in Brooklyn.
Where'd Pop learn how to swim?
I don't know.
Right, so if you head on over to The Geek Show, we have a couple of written reviews up on there right now. We have a written review of a classic western from Mark Cunliffe in High Noon. I know Ewan's done a couple of written pieces. One of our new writers, Ewan, has done a couple of written pieces on True Stories, the David Byrne road trip movie that Graham reviewed on the show a good few months back. And Marketa Lazarosa, which is a Czech New Wave film. And someone's been inducted into the Czech New Wave glory. Hooray! But in the meantime, off the shelf. And you have something for us, Mick, don't you?
I do. I have the feature film debut of director John Irving with The Dogs of War, which is an adaptation of a Frederick Forsyth novel. It stars Christopher Walken, who plays a mercenary who is contracted by a British businessman, who's played by Hugh Millet, to bring about, well, initially just to reconnoitre, but essentially bring about the regime change in the small African nation of Zangaro, where they want to take advantage of mineral wealth and can't do so because the current brutal dictator General Kimber is not playing ball with foreign investment, shall we say. He's also killing people left, right and centre in his own country. It's that kind of dictatorship.
Yeah.
So they go into do a bit of reconnaissance and find out if things are really as bad as they say, to see what the chances are of maybe getting the military to stage a coup and sort of nudge an internal regime change. And ultimately that fails and they end up going in with a small, highly trained group of men a bit wild geese style to try and force regime change. And by quoting wild geese, I've started to put my finger on the problem with this film. It's 2 hours long, which for a 1980s action movie isn't a huge amount of time. But I mentioned that this is John Irvin's feature film debut. He'd done some documentary filming during the Vietnam War, and he would go on to do Hamburger Hill, Raw Deal, and Shiner. But this is the first one. And it almost feels like either he or Christopher Walken decided that this was going to be one or other of their auditions to do a Bond. Because the first 100 minutes feel like a formulaic James Bond movie circa Roger Moore. So yeah, the first sort of 100 minutes or so feel like a Bond movie. There's the setup where Jamie Shannon has the end of his previous exploit, showing the chaos of the aftermath of one of their regime change missions in Central America. The country's not named, but it's 1980, so probably Nicaragua. And then it shows him returning home, and there are scenes of a christening whereby he's been sworn in and doing the vows to be the godfather to one of his colleagues' babies. And we find out that actually it's quite a lonely existence for Jamie Shannon. Played, he's always good value. Christopher Walken is immensely watchable in this. But essentially, we see a lonely man. His accommodation smacks of temporary. It's somewhere that he rests his weary head in between missions. There's no permanent TV aerial, so every time he switches on the news, it's just a snowy, ghosting picture. The fridge contains beer and a gun. It tells you everything you need to know about this guy. He's told in no uncertain terms by his colleague's wife that he's not welcome to be part of the child's life. And so we get that. And then we get this meeting with a businessman, which for businessman, substitute M. And this is for, if you imagine a Bond film from that troublesome period where he was on the verge of resigning constantly. So M's having to come to him. It feels like that. And, and then there's the warning. Just do some reconnaissance. Don't get involved. So, of course, he goes off to do the reconnaissance and then gets involved. It all goes pear-shaped. He then returns back and they find out, and then he goes to see an arms dealer, which is effectively Q Division. And then you get 20 minutes of ultra-violence in this West African country, and then it ends.
Right.
And that's it. Enjoy. In terms of 1980s action movies, I don't think I've seen a 1980s action movie with less actual action in it. It's got some great performances in. Tom Berenger's good value. Walken, as always, good value. But it does feel like you're watching a film that thought it was a Bond movie, but then 100 minutes in remembered it was supposed to be Wild Geese 3.
Right. Yeah, that sounds a bit problematic, doesn't it?
Yeah, so I think the theme of today's Eclectica is films I probably won't watch again.
I mean...
For very different reasons.
Very good. Very, very good. So, am I next?
It's up to you now.
Yep. I have to carry on this baton of a theme we've got going. Because I have... Well, there's a bit of history between me and this next release, because I got in the Buddhist trilogy from Arrow Academy, which is a collection of 3 films from Japan, which details, as you would explain, Buddhism. So there's 3 films in the set, and this is the bonus film that I am covering for you today. It Was a Faint Dream by Akio Chisoji. And now the reason why I had to do this was because I think the set needed covering in some way, shape or form. And I think to cherry pick this film in particular, because this is a film that's separate from that whole trilogy. And judging from my frightened tone of voice, these aren't films that are easy to review. And I think the reason for that is because they are just super dense films. These aren't... Basically, additional reading is required to get into these films, because a lot of them deal with the philosophy of Buddhism. A lot of them go into themes of renewal and rebirth. A lot of them really don't follow, like, the general structure that, like, a lot of films over in the West do. Like, think three-act structure, character relationships, characterization. It doesn't go through that realm at all, and a lot of it just feels, like, incredibly surreal as a result. So, but It Was a Faint Dream, out of the out of the two that I've seen out of the set so far, is easily the film that's the most straightforward. But essentially what we're dealing with here, it's a period piece. It's set in 13th century Kyoto. An imperial court has got control of this peasant girl called, I believe she's called Shijo, who's played by Janet Hatter. And she just essentially is very optimistic of being a part of the court. She ends up getting kidnapped and sold to a powerful daimyo, and that daimyo sets her as a concubine. And as a result, she's incredibly bored by her isolation in this area, strikes up a few relationships with the warlord, the feudal lords, a slew of the heads of the state, and eventually this materializes that maybe court life isn't made for her, and then becomes a nun and decides to wander the countryside of Japan. And that's essentially your plot with It Was a Faint Dream, because this is a super obscure film that, let's face it, not a lot of people have heard about, and it's very hard to talk about, as I was describing earlier. But in a sense, it's oddly compelling, because I guess the main aspects of it, there was problems that I had with some of the previous films that Arrow Academy have included in the set, where, as I was explaining before, that you need to, understand, Japanese history at the time to, fully appreciate these films. And I think Chisuigi responds to that problem by including, a lot of some voiceovers to basically explain the history a bit better. I mean, there's talks, in the opening sequence, there's talks of the Mongolian Empire, the reign of Genghis Khan at the time. So there's basically that historical aspect to it too. I guess where the problem lies in for me is just, needing that research angle to, fully appreciate this. Because, like I was saying, it is just incredibly hard to get into, and to get into the rhythm of it in particular. Not that I think that's a problem half the time. I think there's some very compelling nature to it. I mean, there's a bit where Janet Hatter's character actually manages to seduce one of the monks, the high monk basically, and the high monk is just disgusted by this idea and begins to repent towards her and begins to break down, considering it lust, this indescribable evil that he must get rid of, and is in conflict with his faith. And I guess it works for me that better, because, you do get the sense of, something's at war here, even if, a lot of it's held in, high regard in, courtrooms, rather than in, what we know in the West, where it's, played on the streets.
Yeah.
I think it's, I think it's very interesting. It's not the kind of film that's benefited for a rewatch for me, because, like I said, there's only, it's 2 hours long additionally, so, trying to get into, this kind of film is, incredibly, a tough ask for anyone. But I think the other aspect that, I think works for me is that when we get to the latter half of the film, it does, feel a bit unbounded in a way. Because I guess what it reminds me of when, I guess, the nun, or Janet Hatter's character, decides to get away from this incredibly corrupt empire, is that once she gets on the journey aspect entirely, it starts to feel a bit ungrounded, a bit more earthy. It reminded me a little bit of Aguirre the Wrath of God by Werner Herzog in a way, which is a very odd pull to pull apart, but I guess in the same way that this is just so just incredibly well structured and well thought through. I guess that influence just helps break away from its shackles, really. So overall, I think it's a very interesting film. There's not a lot I can say about it other than I think additional reading is required, and I have to reiterate this point. Yeah, it is. And I guess the box set entirely, I think, whilst it's incredibly important for Japanese New Wave lovers to appreciate and understand, extras-wise, it's a bit disappointing, I have to admit, because you do get additional audio commentaries on the set for some of the films, and that's what I need to, like, fully appreciate and fully understand this.
Yeah.
Because without, like, you know, those, like, audio commentaries, I don't know, then I'm, like, too unintelligent to understand this half the time. So, you know, and that lack of extras, it's a bit disappointing. And in terms of It Was a Faint Dream, there are no extras. It was essentially, this was billed as an extra at Arrow Academy, because what had happened was, when the box set was first announced, there was a rights issue with it where they couldn't get the rights from, I believe, from the Art Theatre Company at the time, or the Art Theatre Guild, where the films are from. And if you know of the Art Theatre Guild, they are known for very surreal, very dense films that honestly wouldn't have a lot of traction over here, other than, you know, a lot of, like, people who would delve into, like, the art house scene in general, like people who Arrow Academy are very good at. So, overall, I mean, it's hard to recommend it. I think if you are a fan of this age of Japanese cinema, then by all means go ahead. But essentially, if you want a starting point into, like, Japanese filmmaking of that time, this isn't really recommended for that moment. It's very interesting, I'll give it that much, and it's very well made in terms of, because, you know, you got to also remember that Japanese filmmaking, even if it's, like, incredibly, like, say, like, hard to grasp as this is, you can still appreciate, like, the craftsmanship that's gone into it. But that is It Was a Faint Dream. That's out now on Arrow Academy as part of the Buddhist Trilogy box set.
You see, I think you've been spoiled.
Yeah.
You don't know the meaning of poor extras. Do you know what I had on Dogs of War?
What?
I had the option of watching the theatrical cut for the UK, which was the full-blown 120-minute version, or I could watch the US cut, which is 114 minutes.
Oh. You see, that's
it. They were my options on the Blu-ray.
You see, that's kind of my luxury for me, because I think this box set is a brainwashing experiment for me to turn Buddhist. You see, that's what I see this box set as now, when I can't escape that idea. It's mortifying.
So, well, I suppose one bit that was omitting from my review is the fact that Dogs of War is out on Eureka from the 14th of October, and I'm sure that fans of 1980s lightweight action movies will lap it up.
Yeah. So, before we close off the show, Graham is kicking in right about now with his review of We the Animals, out now from Montage Pictures.
So when you've got a new American indie coming-of-age film, there are obviously certain questions that you want answered, and chief among them would be how schmaltzy and or twee is this going to be? You can probably do it like one of those political compass tests, can't you, with schmaltzy, gritty, twee, and what's the opposite of twee? Who cares? Henry Rollins, probably. You can do it like that. And when We the Animals, the first fictional feature by Jeremiah Zager, opens with a shot of its three child protagonists shot through a sort of gauzy net curtain, then goes into an opening credit sequence full of scribbled, hand-drawn animation, I mean, I wasn't turned off. I can understand why you might fear the worst, but keep going. This is a film of surprising depth, grit, and insight. As I said, Zagar had directed documentaries before this, including Captivated, The Trials of Pamela Smart, about the real-life true crime case that Gus Van Sant's To Die For was based on. This is obviously a very different film, but some of that same kind of documentarian's energy comes through in it. Zagar enjoys collaging scenes and styles and approaches to his material. He likes watching his cast as they clearly ad-lib, and just in case you think I'm being presumptuous in saying they're clearly ad-libbing, there are copious extras showing his child cast in the middle of the improvisation process, all of which are really quite endearing. It's the story of three mixed-race brothers living in a fairly run-down part of upstate New York, a very different part of New York to what you would traditionally see in the movies. Their parents are played by Raul Castillo and Sheila Vand, the latter of whom is probably most famous for her role in Anna Lily Aminpur's A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. Vand's character, who is simply referred to as Ma, is closest to Jonah, the youngest child, played by Evan Rosado. Jonah has some anxieties about getting older. Next year he's the big 1-0, but Vand reassures him that he should think of himself as not being 10, but being 9 plus 1. And the next year he'll be 9 plus 2. And then a year after that he'll be 9 plus 3. And she says that way he can always remain Mama's little favourite boy. If you think that's a bit clingy, a bit codependent, the film soon addresses why Ma might be so eager to cling on to the unconditional love she gets from her youngest child. She turns up with facial injuries. Pops, played by Raul Castillo, says that she just had some bad dental surgery, but it becomes quickly apparent that he punched her. And what I like most about this is what it doesn't do. There isn't really any ominous build-up to it. You can see that the family are a bit fraught, a bit stressed, but that could be simply because they live in pretty dire circumstances. They're a very poor family. Every time we see Castillo's character before this, he seems like a larger-than-life fun guy. You can see why the boys love him. And I like the fact that the domestic violence just comes out of nowhere. It's not perpetrated by a character who's positioned as a monster or a sinister presence. It's something that happens without warning. You certainly understand why the kids are so desperate for Pops to come back when Mom and Pop separate, even though you know that as soon as he comes back, the cycle will only begin again. And I think there's a certain maturity to acknowledging that even guys who seem like enjoyable, fun, life of the party people can have this kind of darkness and this abusive quality in them sometimes. So it starts off this is about 20 minutes in. It kicks off by doing something very difficult, very complex that could go wrong in any number of ways and doing it very well. And I'm pleased to say that it just keeps on doing this. The three kids go off through the neighbourhood trying to find food and money where they can. They end up being taken in by a local family whose son, Dustin, has something which is extremely valuable in this time period. It's not quite clear when the film's set, but late 80s, early 90s seems to be the best guess. He has a VHS of softcore pornography, which becomes something that obviously bonds him to the growing kids. Jonah, as the youngest kid, finds it more perplexing than anything else, but slowly he comes to realise his own sexuality and his crush on Dustin, which again is another tricky topic which is dealt with incredible delicacy. I think the other thing that it deals with and deserves a lot of credit for is how it addresses poverty. On the surface of it, this film, with its jumble of handheld 16mm and fantasy sequences and its multiracial cast of young people living in poverty, certainly does seem very similar to Ben Zeitlin's horrible 2012 Oscar nominee Beasts of the Southern Wild. That was a film that asked you to actively celebrate its characters refusing life-saving medical treatment because, hey, they live in poverty, they live in nature, they don't like all those plastics and injections, man, like you have in the city. And it's a film where punching the director would feel like an absolutely proportional response to what's in the movie. We the Animals isn't like that at all. It manages to maintain a child's eye perspective and maintain a sense that for them this is a world full of adventure and wonder without soft soaping how difficult life is for them. It reminds me in this way more of Sean Baker's excellent The Florida Project. So it's got an awful lot going for it, and even if those early hand-drawn animations might seem like a bit of a quirky child of step too far, they do make sense in the end. In fact, most of the film's stylistic tics do. It's very easy to say that this kind of naturally lit, chaotic kind of pocket symphony of a film is too indebted to Terrence Malick in the way that a lot of 2010s American indies are very indebted to Terrence Malick. But it's a style that works for the film. Even if it wasn't currently fashionable, it would be the right choice to make this particular film with. The only thing that I had a bit of a problem with is the score by Nick Zamuto, which is kind of downbeat, vaguely retro, chill wave stuff. The kind of thing that, again, you do hear on a lot of modern American indie soundtracks. And unlike the other familiar ingredients in We the Animals, I didn't think it worked compellingly enough with the narrative to justify having it there. But overall, this is a really impressive film. And it's out on Montage Pictures on Blu-ray, and we've been talking about Montage for a couple of years now. This is an imprint of Eureka dedicated to independent and avant-garde films from around the world. All recent releases, mostly films that have not got any cinema distribution, although this has. And I think what I like about Montage Pictures is not that everything they release is great, because, most of them are good, some of them I haven't cared for, but everything they release feels like a step up in ambition, and this, sure enough, feels like the most accessible piece that they have released so far. If you haven't watched anything on Montage and you're looking for a way in, this would be a very good place to start, not least because the usual Achilles heel of the label, their normally sparse extras, are actually very good here. There's an awful lot of featurettes. There's a very funny scene where the whole making of the film is compressed into 1 minute. There's a lot of things that deal with the process of auditioning and working with child actors and allowing them to ad-lib in ways that keep this extraordinary sense of freshness and life that the film has. And you watch it, and it's not like anything in these extras overturns your sense of how the film is made. It's basically exactly how I expected a film like this would have been made. But you watch it, and the impression you get from the feature that you are in very good, safe hands is reinforced. I think, even though it's not exactly a debut, I said Zega had made documentary features before this, but let's say as a calling card that this guy might have a significant career in directing fiction. This is very promising and interesting stuff indeed, and that's We the Animals, which is out this week on Montage Pictures.
Okay then, so coming out on Wednesday the 18th of September is Ad Astra by James Gray, starring Brad Pitt, Tommy Lee Jones, Ruth Negga, Liv Tyler and Donald Sutherland. I remember when this was slated to come out in May, and the reason why it didn't come out in May was that the effects weren't finished, weirdly, which I don't quite know why.
Right.
But, I've heard, very good things, so maybe it's worth giving a shout. Out on Thursday, we have Rambo The Last Blood, the latest in the Rambo series.
Well, presumably the last in the Rambo series.
Well, I just say Last Blood in the title. What am I thinking? Out on the Friday, we have The Farewell, Lulu Wang's, I believe, sophomore effort, which I've heard is getting a lot of critical plaudits in America. Chinese-American drama, essentially, and that's as far as I know. We have The Kitchen by Andrea Berlov, which hasn't been getting a lot of critical plaudits, I'm afraid to say, starring Melissa McCarthy, Teneth Haddish, Elizabeth Moss, Domhnall Gleeson, that cast of characters.
Okay.
And so far, that is your lot. So next week, we are doing a photo negative show because we have Ad Astra, Rambo The Last Blood, and The Farewell coming out the same week. And I think it's only fair that those releases get covered in Off the Shelf in that form, which means that our headline review is going to be a director's lottery.
Dun, dun, dun.
So, Mick, you have the random number generator.
I do, indeed. And if you just bear with me a second, I will press the all-important button. I don't know. We need some sort of like monk chanting or something like that I have on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire in the run-up to this, don't you think? Just to give it a bit of gravitas, build a bit of tension. maybe some...
Akio Chisuiji would be brilliant at
Maybe
this.
some African war drums just building up to a crescendo. I'm sure you can sort it out when you edit the show. Anyway, here we go. The number you require is 40. 40.
40. Now, that is exciting. That is Leos Carax. Now, just to give you a bit of background of who Leos Carax is, I should say, he is the director behind Holy Motors, which the incredibly surreal... weird is out film that I've heard plenty about, but I don't know much.
You've never seen it?
No, I've never seen Holy Motors. I've never seen it.
How are you allowed on this podcast? I thought it was a thought it was a qualifying factor. I wasn't allowed on any of the podcasts until I'd seen Holy Motors. How did you sneak under the radar? It's got...
I don't know, because there's plenty of classic films that I've never seen.
Well, me too, but honestly, it's worth it for the musical interlude scene alone. If you watch it for no other reason, it's worth it for that.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's actually rather exciting, because I've never seen Holy Motors, and that would probably be a good shout to do. Other films that Carax has done is Boy Meets Girl. I believe Polar X is another one. He's got Annette, the Sparks musical starring Adam Driver, coming out very, very soon as well.
And I want the intriguingly titled Tokyo! !
He's a very odd duck, but he's one of these filmmakers that is very exciting. But yes, until next week with Leos Carax and a photo negative, that's your lot for Cinema Eclectica. I have been Aidan.
And I've been Mick.
We've also had a Graham spliced in somewhere, and we shall see you next week.
Thanks for listening.
I hope. I haven't made many films. I've started making films young, but I've only made 4. Because in between films you have to wait. I can't make a film if I feel I'm the same person who made the last one. I'm going to bore myself too much. So I have to travel, fall in love, fall sick. And meet people and try to, and when I feel there's something maybe different or maybe new that I want, to question, I feel ready to make a new film. This time there's been 8 years in between the films, so